Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Greetings of the day, friends. I start with lecture number 8. In the last lecture, I was discussing the effect of growing biofuels or the crops that are needed for the biofuels in Malaysia. So, today I will start with the effect of biofuel crops growth in Africa. The concern is from two perspectives. One is the farmers from these countries, they have switched over growing to the biofuel crops uh, rather than going for or rather than putting more efforts for the food crops. And that is partly because of their own requirement, that is the domestic requirement, and secondly, that much of the biofuel that is produced in such manner is used by the United States and the European Union. So, in that context, an example of Africa is also being discussed. Reason being because many of the nations that are part of the African continent, they are in the less developed categories, and therefore we need to question whether the subsidies that are being given by those nations for the growth of biofuel crops, whether that is purposefully or let's say considering the fair trade objectives of the WTO, whether that should be promoted or there has to be a critical evaluation of such policies by the policymakers and also from the people, those who are sitting at the WTO. So, in that context, I start with the reason why African nation is one of the key places where they try to get the biofuel crops, because biomass in the tropical countries is higher in terms of photosynthesis efficiency. With the growing demand for biocrops, this can lead to a shift in agriculture pattern from food-based crops to biocrops. Hundreds of African people depend upon wetland for their livelihood. Now, what is basically the wetland? Wetland is an area within the inland or a water body within the inland system where they have water surroundings and then the fresh water surroundings, and there is an entire ecosystem that is involved in that wetland, or it consists of its own ecosystem. People are very much relying upon the wetland for fresh water. Also, the birds and the animals that are living nearby, they are dependent upon the wetland area. But with the promotion of this biofuel cropping, that wetland area is now used for the growth of biofuel crops, and that the land that was free land around those wetland areas are used. So, as a consequence, the animals or the birds and the people who freely used to graze their animals all around in those places, they are deprived of these kind of rights or these kind of privileges. These wetlands are also the potential places for the growth of biofuels. Mozambique and Tanzania, two of the African nations taken here as an example, are well suited to growing a range of feedstock crops, including sugarcane and cassava for ethanol and oilseeds for biodiesel. Now, as explained to you earlier, that basically it is the ethanol that is produced from this biofuel cropping, and these sugarcane and cassava, they are very important sources for the production of ethanol. Of all the biocrops, the cultivation of sugarcane poses heavy burden because the water requirement is quite heavy in the sugarcane cropping. It requires large amount of water and is therefore and often is grown in wetlands. Most of the biocrops so produced is brought by the European Union and the United States because of its availability at the cheaper price. On the other hand, now you see that since the same can be grown in the other countries, maybe in United States. Of course, I would not say that the same can be grown in the European Union because the climatic conditions of the Europe are not very favorable for the growth of these kind of biofuel crops. But definitely some part of the United States can be used. However, they realize that the level of investment that they have to do there would be quite much, and secondly, they may be get if their farmers start growing these kind of crops, then their food price may get affected, and even the surplus of the food grains that they produce, that the surplus level will get down, so that can affect the price of the food in the international market also. So realizing this, they are searching for the grounds and have chosen African countries for these purposes. On the other hand, the African economy remains in deficit of its basic food crops. The native people depend upon the availability of fresh and clean water and for domestic use and irrigation, using the areas for seasonal grazing and for agriculture purposes. So, as explained, that it is not only confined to the use of land for growing these biofuel crops, rather the entire ecosystem gets affected if it is used for these economic purposes or for the commercial growth of biofuel cropping. That actually is a wetland area, is basically a natural habitat for all these, and that gets interrupted by the human intervention for the growth of these kind of biofuel crops, and mainly that also for the commercial purposes. Now this has to be again connected with what we were discussing in our last lecture, the categorization of the subsidies for in the categorization of the subsidies for agriculture purposes in terms of amber box, blue box, and the green box. So whether we consider the state support being given or subsidies being provided for the growth of biofuel crops in the uh, amber box category or in the blue box category or in the green box category. Now, since if a nation or a state is aggressively trying to use its support or is aggressively giving the support, realizing that this can help to get a foreign earning or help them to get the foreign exchange, then definitely it will be shifted to the amber box category. But then there is an exemption clause being created for, and that mainly for the less developed countries, and quoting here the example of Africa, since they are definitely in need of heavy foreign exchanges, so they in one way or the other get induced to opting for the biofuel cropping. But as a consequence, there is a side effect to it, that their own people, they get deprived of the food, and secondly, the farm prices or the prices of the crops in their own country, they get increased for this reason. The native people depend upon the availability of fresh and clean water and for domestic use and irrigation, using the areas for seasonal grazing and for agriculture purposes. With more of their land being used for the cultivation of biocrops, traditional economic system becomes affected. There is indeed attempt to reduce subsidies for agriculture purposes. However, state support is also provided by the developed countries. Now, on the other hand, the developed nation, they are providing the subsidies for biofuels, and they consider this for the research purposes, realizing that this can be an alternative to the fossil fuel. And in their legislation or when they promote these kind of statutes, they consider or they relate it with the investment for the research purposes. The example is quoted here about the United States. Now, after tagging it with those statutes with the research purposes, what is the effect? That it shifts to, instead of putting this in the amber box category, the subsidies or the state support for biofuels in the developed country nation, that gets linked with the green box category and gets heavy exemptions, where state support is being provided to promote the use of biofuels. Several states in the United States established lower tax rates for gasohol than gasoline, because they are also shifting the mode of the use, and they are promoting this by giving tax concession or reducing the price of the use of gasohol. Additionally, it has been noticed that previous act volumetric ethanol excise tax credit is in the committee stage for the renewal, as it has expired. Presently, United States has introduced a bill entitled Biofuel Infrastructure and Agriculture Product Market Expansion Act of 2021. This bill directs the Department of Agriculture to establish a grant program for expanding the market for biofuels derived from domestic agriculture products. So you can very well see that they already have this statute, and they are trying to enact new statutes for the promotion of the use, not only the use of biofuels, but also for its cultivation in their own country as well. But then providing more subsidies to the farmers, for those who are interested in, or at least even if they are not interested, to create their interest for producing this kind of biofuel crops. Entities eligible for grant include state, local, and tribal government authorities, agencies, partnership, and instrumentalities of such government and group of such entities. So they have also categorized which all people can be benefited of this. Mainly those who are participating in the upcoming growth of, or let's say those who are participate in motivating the entire array of event for the growth of this promotion, for the promotion of the growth of biofuel crop. So they all get benefited in one way or the other in the form of grant. But then the grant, what is grant? Grant is kind of state support being provided that can be used for constructive purposes, and there is no expected beneficial outcome, or we do not connect it with any such economic benefit. As in case of subsidies, we do connect the financial support being provided by the state, but then it is for commercial or economic benefit, and that has to be for a specific group of industry. So here we do have two elements, that is financial contribution, and that also for some specific industries, but there is no such benefit linked with it. It is simply a state policy or a nation's policy for transforming its use of sources of energy earlier, which was confined to the fossil fuel use, and now shifting it to a more sustainable use, that is through the biofuels, which requires group of entities. This requires automobile manufacturers to ensure that of at least 50% of the automobiles and light duty truck manufactured for sale in United States need to be functional with the blended fuel. So now it's not only that the biofuel crops has to be grown, but then the vehicles, they are also supposed to use the fuel that is being produced through the biofuel cropping. These bills and several other ancillary acts heavily support the biofuel based industry, keeping in view the WTO objectives as guiding principles while framing domestic policies. The developed nations are expected to reduce aggregate measurement of support categories under Amber Box. However, with the increase in such adopted policies, the burden seems finally to fall again on developing and less developed countries. Reason being because the farmers from the less developed countries and from the developing countries, they will realize it's more profitable for them to grow these biofuel crops. Therefore, they will switch over to, instead of going from the food crops to this, and they will try to avail more of the benefit. Now, as a consequence, they will have to bear, the people of those nations, they will have to bear higher cost for the food, and sometime it could be that those countries may have to import the food crops from the other countries, from wherever they can get at a cheaper rate. Therefore, one cannot deny that the rise in the demand for biofuel can be both an opportunity and a threat to the African people. In order to define the status of subsidies in agriculture products, there are specific provisions in the Agreement on Agriculture, but these provisions do not cover biofuels. Now, why I have tried to discuss this question elaborately? Because so far as the Agreement on Agriculture is concerned, definitely it is a separate agreement altogether, although it is interrelated with subsidies and countervailing measure agreement. But then it does not cover this latest issue, which is high on rise, that is the state subsidy being provided for the purpose of growth of biofuel cropping. Although we cannot deny that we need to shift to an alternative mode of energy, sources of energy, but then how about giving the state support, because subsidy has been several times or often being critically evaluated by the WTO. So there has to be a clear line drawn between the giving of subsidies for the justifiable purposes and the subsidies being used for the non-justifiable purposes, and to what extent subsidies being given for the cropping of biofuels should be, to what extent that subsidy should be considered as justifiable, and to after what limit it becomes non-justifiable. It is similar to making the comparison in the context of actionable subsidy, that actionable subsidies are permitted to an extent that it does not create any trade distorting effect, or it does not affect the market competition. Now, how we find that there is an effect on the market competition or there is a trade distorting effect, although they are not the perfect mechanisms to understand the distortion, but when we realize that the demand of the similar product from a foreign country that was in competition with the same product which is now being subsidized has gone down, or it could be that there is a price suppression or depression of that product which is in competition with the product now that is subsidized, or there is a artificial increase in the sale of the subsidized product. So these are the some of the factors that can be taken into consideration when we try to figure out whether there has been a market distortion or not. So similarly, something has to be drawn in an objective manner to know whether the subsidies given for the biofuel cropping, they affect the market or they create any market distortion or not. In order to define the status of subsidies in agriculture product, there are specific provisions in the Agreement on Agriculture, but these provisions do not cover biofuel subsidies and their effect. For such new emerging issues, the role of ministerial conference holds significance. Now, ministerial conference, as I have discussed in the earlier slides, they are meant for the legislative purposes. They are the law making bodies of the WTO. And after this ministerial conference comes the General Council or the General Assembly, so as can be called, which is basically the executive branch of the WTO. So here the burden lies, or let's say the responsibility lies mainly on the ministerial conference to take certain initiative for creating any law or amending the existing provisions of the subsidies agreement, where realizing the fact that there has to be a balance between trade and sustainability, on that basis they can add certain provisions in the existing agreement on agriculture, or they may create another agreement that can create a well planned provisions for knowing or for using subsidies for the purpose of growth of biofuel, depending upon countries, the variance of the country's economies as classified as developed, developing and less developed. Finally, the analysis: the farming occupation in every country is the source of food, the basis of life. Therefore, it is unpragmatic to put on trial the whole issue of farm subsidies for the purpose of promoting free trade principles as the fundamental market values. As we have started discussion at that very time, it was kind of challenging, and also it was kind of a dual thought coming every time, that on what basis we can apply the same economic concepts to the agriculture trade as we apply for the industrial goods. So here at the end, also realizing the entire scenario of the countries based on their economic classification and also the emerging challenges, it seems that it is unpragmatic to put the entire farming community on trial, stating that free trade based on comparative cost advantage theory can be the best way to decide the fair prices of the crops, and also to induce the nations that if they cannot produce the farm products according to the price quoted by the WTO, or other way it can be said as an external reference price, then they must go for another alternative, that is to import that crop from foreign market. So whether these are really pragmatic solutions or not, that debate still remains and will remain continuing. What is ironical here, the linking of development agenda and welfare with the trade in agriculture products. What seems very paradoxical, that the trade agenda of the developing and less developed nations, that is being linked with the trade of agriculture product. It seems the WTO has tried to set a system where developing and less developed nations, they will have to export their farm products, and after earning whatever earning they get by the export of the farm products, only through that recourse they can obtain the technological know-how, or they can get the updated technologies. So whether that is the right way of doing things, or there can be some better methods where the developing and less developed nations, they can get the technology from the developed nations in some other manner. The agreement on agriculture in the WTO was included with the idea of creating a comprehensive working system based on the concept of free trade and accomplishing fair trade objectives. So that was the vision when this agreement on agriculture was introduced, that basically it was WTO's objectives that should be fulfilled, the WTO's objective of creating fair opportunities for others, creating equal market opportunities, raising the standard of living, giving chance for the development to developing and less developed countries. But if the provisions that are covered under the agreement on agriculture, or the way they are interpreted or the way they are framed, if they could not create a wide scope for the developing and less developed countries, then it will be difficult for these countries to come up and in a way compete with the, or if not compete, then to attain the same level of technological advancement as the developed nations are today. The profound objectives of the WTO were established to meet equitable aspirations such as raising the standard of living, ensuring maximum employment, and increasing the income levels of the nation, where the living standards of the majority of the citizens is too low to meet their basic needs. This was the end of the topic on agriculture subsidies, or mainly on agreement on agriculture. Now we start with another topic, a very important issue, that is the trade practice of dumping in the WTO. In the WTO system, we don't have an agreement termed as anti-dumping practices, but it has been taken right from the way it was existing in the GATT system, and the earlier provisions that were included in the GATT system with regard to regulating the practices, regulating the trade practices, or putting check on the practice of dumping, that has been widely elaborated. So that is the main difference here. There seems to be, from the title that has been put on the title that has been given for this agreement, it seems that there is a direct connection between the dumping provisions, or the provisions that were in the GATT agreement to regulate the dumping. The same has been kept, but in addition to that, there has been further expansion to some of the provisions, and some of the new provisions has been added to give a framework of a separate agreement to regulate or to check the practices of dumping by the nations. So this is titled as, in the WTO system, it is titled as Agreement on Implementation of Article 6 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So from the title, you can very well understand that it is not something new from the GATT, but something was already, or you can say the foundation stone of how to regulate the practice of dumping was laid down in the GATT system itself, and later only it has been widened, its scope has been widened, and its feature has, some new features has been added to it. So what is that? We start with this topic. Background: contracting parties to the GATT negotiated detailed codes relating to anti-dumping. So it is not something new, but the practice of dumping has been in existence prior to the creation of GATT also. The economic concept of dumping has been different, and the way it was defined in the GATT system and now in the WTO system is different. Usually, if we say the products are being dumped or the goods are being dumped in any country, then the general notion is that there is a bad quality product that is now being dumped or that is sold in that particular country. So that is one conventional way of thinking about the dumping practice, but that is not the case when we see things from the economic perspective, because in the WTO, the definition that has been adopted or the way it has been defined is of different nature. It does not stick to the goods being sold in a particular country, or the goods being mainly exported in a particular country when they are of inferior quality, or intentionally exporting the goods of inferior quality to another country. So that is not basically the real way to define the things as per the WTO system. So here it starts with contracting parties to the GATT negotiated detailed codes relating to anti-dumping. It was that during the time of GATT itself, they were trying to figure out what best methods can be adopted to put check on the dumping practice. The first such quote, the Agreement on Anti-Dumping Practices, entered into force in 1967 as a result of Kennedy Round. So, as you know, that GATT started functioning 1st January 1948, and every time they also had annual and other periodical negotiations and also periodical conferences, and one of them was these Kennedy Round. So, that negotiations and conferences were going on to know how well this system, the GATT system, is working, what kind of changes are supposed to be included in it or incorporated in it, and further whether there is a requirement of the new code. So, because the GATT was not a very comprehensive agreement in itself, therefore, for putting check on the practices of dumping, the one of the prominent code was Kennedy Round, or that was during Kennedy Round. The issue of dumping was widely discussed in the GATT system. However, the United States never signed the Kennedy Round Code, and as a result, the code had little practical significance. The GATT 1994 sets forth a number of basic principles applicable in trade between members of the WTO, including the most favored nation principle. It also requires that imported products not be subject to internal taxes or other changes in excess of those imposed on domestic goods, and that imported goods in other respects be accorded treatment no less favorable than domestic goods under the domestic laws and regulation, and established rules regarding quantitative restrictions, fees, and formalities related to importation and custom valuation. So, how GATT was trying to find out the solution for dumping in case the nation is involved in dumping, and secondly, even more important was firstly to find out whether that there were two key problems that GATT has to resolve. First was to know if the product is being dumped. Second was, what are the remedies? Now, the remedies can be firstly either to put fines, second is to stop trade with that country, and third was to put extra tariff. Now, the problem was not in applying the remedies or putting fines or to stop trade with the country and either to go for putting extra tariffs, but the key thing was that GATT was promoting the idea of free trade, that is through most favored nation clause. All right, that means the goods from, if the goods are being imported from one country, the equal treatment has to be given to the like goods from all the other contracting parties of the GATT. All right. So, if the country A is an importer and it has imported a kind of product from country B, and rest other countries like country C, D, E, they are also involved in producing the like product, and they are also willing to sell the same product in the market of country A. So, country A should not have any discrimination with regard to the same product from country C, D, X, Y, Z. So, that was how the most favored nation clause was interpreted and is interpreted till date. Now, in case if they say they while putting this, while applying these remedies, if they put fine, okay, so how this fine can be imposed? Either the country has to pay that fine for the practice of dumping, or it could be that fine can be in the form of putting higher taxes to that product which is being imported or which is being dumped. That can be one option. Second is to stop trade with that country. Let's say country A finds that country B is dumping its product or kind of product. Maybe it is selling, country B is selling 10 products to country A. So, out of that 10 products, 1 or 2 products are being dumped in country A by country B. So therefore, to totally stop that 1 or 2 products that are being dumped by the country B, that can be the other way out. The third is to allow the products being introduced in the market or allow the product being sold in the market of country A, but with higher tariffs. Now, if the higher tariffs are imposed, then that gets abrogated, or that is a kind of contradiction to most favored nation clause, because no most favored nation clause principally says that there cannot be any discrimination between the product of one country and between the product of second, third, and other countries. So that there can be some kind of contradiction to these values that are being introduced through the most favored nation clause. So either the nations that are imposing the dumping practices, they must accept that the new framework for putting check to the dumping practices will allow such kind of tariffs to be imposed. So they are like those the tariffs that are imposed as a remedial measure to put check on the practice of dumping. They should be considered exemptions, or they should be exempted from the most favored nation clause, or the rules or the regulations of the most favored nation clause. So that was kind of idea being debated often and often in the GATT, and finally that was how it was decided that if we simply stop the trade with that country, or we simply stop that product being introduced in or being sold in the market, if we find that it is dumped, then that can be a very harsh method, or that can be a very protectionist method. So instead of going for that, why not to put extra tariffs and create an exception to the most favored nation clause? So that was the way out. They tried to find whenever the negotiations with regard to different codes being adopted for putting check on the dumping practice was decided. Article 6 of GATT 1994, on the other hand, explicitly authorizes the imposition of a specific anti-dumping duty on imports from particular source in excess of bound rates in cases where dumping causes or threatens injury to a domestic industry or materially retards the establishment of a domestic industry. So Article 6 of the GATT was in that respect comprehensive. It was not totally comprehensive, but at least one fundamental thing it has introduced in this free trade system, because why there was a need to create a legislation, or why there was a need to enact such a law to put check on dumping in when we talk about the free trade, that is another question. So let's firstly try to understand that dumping does not in any way affects the free trade, but dumping definitely affects the concept of fair trade. And in my earlier lectures, I have explained that WTO primarily, or the primary principle of the WTO is to promote the concept of free trade, but the secondary principle or the secondary concept are the fair trade. So regulating the these practices, or putting check on the practice of dumping, is basically a fair trade aspect. Why it is fair trade aspect, we will go into that detail later on. But firstly, let me explain this. Article 6 of the GATT 1994, on the other hand, explicitly authorizes the imposition of specific anti-dumping duties. So once it is found that the goods are being dumped, for example, let's say this is country A and this is country B. Country A finds that the export from this country B, or let's say the goods that are coming from country B to country A, the market of country A, they are being dumped. So what can be the way? We cannot put total ban to those products, to put extra bound rates. Okay, so whatever is the duty that, or kind of penalty that should be imposed, that is imposed in the form of extra bound rate. That means if this country B is selling its product in the market of country A, let's say the individual cost or the cost of that single product is $10, and that is like a dumped price after the goods are being dumped here, then whatever its original price, the original price, let's say, is $12. So they should put an extra duty of $2, extra duty of $2 to compensate the lesser price that is being quoted. So basically dumping is a kind of exporting the product at a lesser price than its normal value, or lesser price than the price at which it is sold in the domestic market. I will come to that, what is its definitional part, but basically Article 6 of the GATT 1994 authorized the country which is importing that product, and after finding the goods that are imported in its market, they are dumped. So whatever is the difference of the price, that should be that they can put it in the form of tariff or in the form of bound rates. In excess where dumping causes or threatens injury to a domestic industry or materially retards the establishment of domestic industry. Now, what are the grounds on which they can impose such duties or extra tariffs? That in case their domestic industry is threatened, that means the like product are also produced in the same country, the country that is importing the goods, and then they find that there is a threat to their industry, so therefore they can impose such duties. Or if materially retards the establishment, or the domestic in that country, the same like industry is just coming up, it is at its nascent stage, but now it is suffering from or facing a kind of competition because of the dumped product. Or take here another illustration: country X, country Y. And country X, now it's transforming its economy from rural setup to an industrial setup. Let's say it starts with the car manufacturing industry. But it is also importing cars from country Y. Now country Y sees that country X is coming up with new industry, that is the car manufacturing industry, which at some point of time can be their rivals, or at least it may affect the sale of the cars from country Y. So what they can do, they can artificially reduce the price of cars that are being imported to country X. Okay, so whatever cars that are being imported from this country to country X, they can reduce the price. And what will be the consequence? The new upcoming industry here in country X, that will get a big jolt, or they will get some kind of threat because of the lowering or artificial lowering of price by country Y. So that is like it materially retards the establishment of domestic industry. That then what country X has a remedy? Realizing that they have artificially lowered the price and they are dumping the product, then they can impose the extra tariffs to the product or the car that are coming from or that are being imported from country Y, extra tariffs. Or we can say that they are the excess of the bound rates that can be imposed by country X in order to compensate the loss that it is going to suffer because of the artificial lowering of price by country Y. Introduction. With the promotion of free trade by the WTO, the member states have started reducing trade barriers both in agriculture and industrial goods. As we all know, that those nations who are signatory to the WTO system, after signing, they are bound by this obligation to lower the tariffs or to remove the barriers to trade, because then only the free trade can be promoted. That is like key to it. And that is done, recall here, realizing the effects that the nations, if they are not given chances to trade with each other freely, then that leads to some kind of bitterness in the relationship, and we cannot expect the customers or the consumers, they can be benefited in a more efficient manner, or they can get the most quality products. So realizing that historical aspect has been discussed already, but here introducing this or relating this with the dumping agreement, I just gave a brief reflection to it, that the member states have started reducing the trade barriers both in agriculture and industrial sectors. As a natural consequence of phasing out these trade barriers, consumers' access to the imported product has indeed become easier, and because of the market competitiveness, the prices of product has become lower. Now, what is the tendency after the lowering of these barriers due to the free trade? The consumers are benefited in the sense that they have more options to get the good, and many a times if they find the foreign goods, they are of better quality, then they go for it. Sometimes they even go for the luxurious purposes, realizing that they have better options in the array of the foreign goods. So multinational companies or the foreign companies, they know this tendency of the consumers. So what they do in order to capture those markets, they artificially lower the price. Now lowering the price artificially has two benefits to them. One is the rival products that is existing in the domestic market of that very country gets threatened, or sometimes that gets vanquished totally, that is eradicated or being absorbed by that multinational company. Secondly, they are able to capture that market and create their own monopoly where they themselves will dictate the price of the goods. They will be very much manipulating the demand and supply factor in that very country or in that very market. Example is like when Coca-Cola came to India, there were several other companies, those who were producing fizzy drinks or let's say the soft drinks. But after it established itself, it purchased all those companies. So that is another, that is an example how initially the bigger multinational company enters in the market, any of the domestic market, and they're realizing that it is facing competition with those domestic producers, they will lower the price. After lowering the price, they will be able to swallow, or they will able to eat up those small companies, because the consumers, they will have a better option available at a cheaper price. So that is how it works. Now when the free trade was introduced initially, the multinational, they were able to understand this opportunity. They find that there are many markets where they can jump into it and simply take away the things, or after a certain period of time they will be able to establish their monopoly, and that is what is explained here. The consumer's access to the imported product has indeed become easier, and because of the market competitiveness, the prices of the product has become lower. Both the side, they have to lower the price. Despite the promotion of these free trade objectives, the market system of the member states has to face new challenge, such as unfair use of subsidies, strategic use of subsidies for predatory pricing, and for dumping the products in the market of other countries. Now, one thing is that if the domestic producer, when it comes into competition with a multinational company, and multinational company has lowered the price of the same product, then there is one alternative, only one there are rather one alternative left, that it lowers the price of the product to meet that competition. Now if it lowers the price of the product, then how it sustain it, because that means it is suffering the loss, or in the long run it will be suffering the losses. So the way out is either the country or the state, it's start giving subsidy to that kind of company. But as you recall that, if you recall this prohibited subsidy, where it is totally prohibited to give such kind of state support to a company in order to enhance the purchase of domestically produced goods, when those domestically produced goods are in competition with the foreign goods. So that again is a contradiction to the WTO rules, or that is something prohibited and cannot be done. The nation cannot give subsidies to their own domestic producers when they are facing competition with a multinational exporter, and in order to sustain in the market, such like support cannot be given. Now here, on the other hand, subsidies sometimes are given to the multinationals, or that kind of support is being provided to the foreign producers when they are exporting the product at a lower price, and that kind of subsidy in a way is considered as subsidies for export or subsidies for dumping. Now how it is, that will be explained. The relationship between subsidies and dumping can be explained like this. Like this is country A and this is country B. Now country B is exporting goods to country A. Okay, this country B is exporting goods to country A. First is, when will it be considered as dumping? When it is dumping. As per the WTO rules, it is dumping when B is exporting goods to country A at a price lesser than its price in domestic market, that is country B. That is country B. So then it is dumping. And if it continues for the long run, if the products that are being exported to country A at a lower price than the domestic market value for the long run, they will be able to capture the market of country A. But then the question arises, if they are exporting at a lesser price in the long run, that means they will also suffer the loss. So in order to compensate that loss, what is the way out? There must be some kind of support from the state. So that support is considered as subsidies for dumping. Now, in case of subsidies for export, it is different, and subsidies for dumping, there is a kind of minor difference. Subsidies for dumping is when the price has been artificially reduced, and in case of subsidies for export, it is not necessary that there is a reduction in the price, of the exported good. And in case of dumping, the other thing is the same goods should have been sold in country B. If the goods are simply exported, then we cannot say that there is a dumping. Then the subsidies are provided only for the export purposes, because in order to know whether the dumping is being practiced or not, we need to draw the difference of its price of that product when it is sold in the domestic market and when it is sold in another foreign country. So if there is no such selling of the product in the domestic market or in any other country, it is simply one country where the goods are exported, then we say that it is subsidies for export, because we do not know what is its real price in the domestic market. So there is a minor difference between subsidies for export and subsidies for dumping. But in a way, there can be subsidies for dumping, and there actually is. Taking into consideration the trade statistics, it is evident that business firms from both developed and developing nations, in order to maximize profit, try to outmaneuver in the free trade system by resorting to trade practice or dumping, or using subsidies for dumping. Now, it is not simply, this practice is not only confined to the developed nation, that they dump the goods to the developing nations, but it is, on the other hand, also the developing countries that are dumping the products to the developed countries by reducing its price, or sometime by giving subsidies for the dumping. If we see or analyze the number of cases that are coming before the WTO, the cases or the dumping practices are highest in number, and many a times it is not the cases are not genuine, but it is like a tit for tat situation. For example, if India has imposed any dumping duty to American product, or India has challenged the United States in some of the products that it is exporting to India, that these products are dumped, it's not very surprising that United States may, as a tit for tat, make the similar claim with regard to any such Indian export to the United States. So this is mainly the challenging on the grounds of dumping nowadays has become a new ground for bargaining the trading position between one country and another country. That is one reason why there are not many problems coming up with the WTO system also. Another reason for why these challenges are coming up, that there is no uniform competition policy in the nations. Now, firstly, the WTO has not whole and sole adopted the competition policy, but that is not for its own reasons, that is not for the reasons to support any bloc of the nations. But since the countries have been classified, or the member states have been classified as developed, developing, and less developed, they all have different market situation. Their economics and financial situation all differs from one to another. Therefore, it's not feasible to have a uniform set of competition rules where the efficiency principle, where the production principles and fixing the rate of the product can be defined in a strict manner. So therefore, we do not have, or the WTO does not proposes till date a uniform set of principles on the competition law, although on an individual basis the nations have, in order to maintain certain level of efficiency, to put certain checks on monopoly practices, they have adopted or enacted certain rules on the competition policy to make their market more efficient, and also to allow other nations, or and also allow other companies to introduce their business setup in that particular country. So that is one reason why the dumping or any such legislation on regulating the practice of dumping is not very successful. Now the key question arises, basically, what is dumping? Dumping in general can be defined as the practice of selling goods in a foreign market at a price below their domestic selling price after allowing for the differences due to transportation expenses, tariffs and other cost justification. Now let's understand what basically is dumping. It is not what the earlier beliefs were, that something regarding dumping the inferior quality goods, but it is something when the goods are exported to foreign market at a price lesser than domestic market price. Domestic market we say that dumping has been practiced. So how it can be explained? Like, if the domestic market price of good, that is A is a good, and domestic market price, domestic DMP, is $10. Okay, this is the price at which it is sold in its domestic market, that is in its home country. Now it is exported in, let's say, to country B. Export, and the price of its export is $9. So you can see that there is it is exported at a lesser price. Then we say that the product is being dumped. The difference there, where there is a difference in the price, and domestic price is higher, not simply the difference, but the domestic price is higher than the export price, at a price below their domestic selling price after allowing for the differences due to transportation expenses, tariff and other cost justification. Now there are other costs that need to be added. Reason being, because it could be, this is one example where the domestic market price is $10 and export price of the product is $9. So we say here the product is dumped. Now another example is, let's say, if the domestic market price of product A in its country is $10, and when it is sold in country B of this at $10, is the product dumped? Yes, the product is still dumped, because we need to take into consideration that what should be its actual export price. Its actual export price should include this $10 plus the transportation expenses plus other cost. So sometime the comparison that is being done is not with the domestic market price, that is the $10. It can be here the $9 price also. How it can be the $9? That is the actual cost or the factory price, because the price in which the product is sold in the domestic market is again a bit higher than what is its actual cost price or its factory price, because the certain domestic tariffs are also imposed, or there is some transportation expenses even in that case. So therefore we calculate it keeping in mind what should be the genuine transportation cost, what should be the other genuine tariffs that should be imposed, and after that we try to figure out whether the export price that is being quoted here is genuine or not. But if there is a difference, like we find there is a higher domestic market price, or if even if there is no difference between the domestic market price and the export price, then we consider that it's a probable case of dumping. Such an export at a lesser price affect the sale of the like product in the market of importing country. Now, why we need to study this dumping, or why we need to analyze this problem? That is because, as I again say, that if we are quoting here the example of product from country A to country B, sold at a lesser price than domestic market price, and there should be a like product existing here. Okay, the next feature is like product. Now, this like product will face the competition from the artificially reduced price, and after that it faces its competition with this artificially reduced price, the sale of this will be affected. So that means basically the dumping is creating an injury. Take it in that way. Now, these are the example here of two countries, country A and country B. Country B produces, let's say they produces toothpaste, all right, or we take a more better example in the context of understanding. Let's say they produces cotton clothes, all right. Country B is producing cotton cloth, and country A is also producing cotton cloth. Now, country A wants to export its goods to country B, the same cotton clothes to country B. Country A has let's say the price for every 100 shirts it charges $100. That is the, let's say, actual price of cotton shirts, 100 cotton shirts here in country A. Country B also has for 100 cotton shirts, here the price is $105. Okay, it's a bit higher in country B. Now, country A realizes that they can sell their cotton shirts here in country B. So if they are exporting it, the same product in country B, then adding the transportation cost, adding the other tariffs, this comes out to be $110 for 100 shirts exported. All right, this is the actual price, that is $110. Now they give the subsidy for the purpose of dumping, or they want to dump its product. Even if the subsidy is not given, let's forget the question of subsidy, but they want to dump the product, so they artificially lower the price, and they are selling the same product here at $100 or exporting it at $100 into country B. Now, the cotton shirts that are originally produced from country B, they are facing direct competition with the cotton shirts that are being imported from country A, or that country A is exporting to country B. Therefore, with this, the sale of the like product in the importing country, that will get affected, or we can say that there will be an injury in the terms of market loss being faced by the shirt manufacturers, or those who are dealing with the trade or business of shirt, they will be facing. So, what can be the remedy in this context? That the country B will try to put an extra tariff on whatever cotton shirts that are being imported by country B. So, they can put an extra tariff of $10, and they can say that now it should be sold at a minimum price of $110 here. That should be the price here for the shirts being imported from country A. Now, this will create some kind of fair competition between the shirts that are originally produced from country B and then the shirts that are being imported from country A. That is the way how the problem of dumping generally is solved in the WTO system. Now, the question arises, when does the dumping affects the market position? So, the practice of dumping means selling a product in a foreign market at less than the normal market value, and that there exists a price discrimination between the home and export market. For the purpose of this agreement, a product is to be considered as being dumped that is introduced into commerce of another country at less than its normal value if the export price of the product exported from one country to another is less than comparable price in the ordinary course of trade for the like product when destined for consumption in the exporting country. So there has to be a comparison being drawn that similar such goods is also being consumed by the domestic producer. If the same is not being consumed by the country which is exporting the product, then there is another alternative method to find out. Here this is explained where there are no sales of the like product in the ordinary course of trade in domestic market of the exporting country, or when because of the particular market situation or the low volume of the sales in the domestic market of the exporting country, such sales do not permit a proper comparison. Then what alternatives can be drawn? Okay, thank you for giving time. I'll start the next lecture and continue with the same topic after a while. Thank you very much.